So welcome everyone. My name is Mary Eleanor Power, and I am the Director of Marketing Communications for Dalhousie University's Faculty of Open Learning and Career Development. And thanks so much for joining us for today's webinar, Turn Financial Literacy into Capability. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that Dalhousie University is located in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. We are all treaty people. I'd like to begin by welcoming our host of today's webinar, Stephanie Holmes-Winton. And Stephanie is the CEO and founder of CacheFlo Inc., a software company that builds behavior-based spending management tools. And just a little bit about Stephanie before we jump right in. She spent a decade as a financial advisor, helping clients get more life from their money. And she went on to launch training programs so that other financial professionals hone their cash flow management skills before starting her own software company. And I'll leave it at that for now, but I know Stephanie will be sharing more about herself as we move through the webinar. And thanks so much for joining us. If you have any questions, as Stephanie has said, please feel free to open up your chat box at the bottom of your screen. And just a quick logistical note on the chat box for those who aren't familiar. If you make sure that the to column is addressed to everyone, then everyone can see your questions. Otherwise, I'm happy to read them aloud so that everyone is aware of the questions that are being asked. And just as a note for those who may not be able to join us for the full webinar, you really should, because there will be a contest at the end where you can win a special prize. And as well, if anyone has to leave early, we will be sending out an email later today before the end of the business day with a recording of the webinar, as well as a link to the program that Stephanie will be telling us a little bit more about in the webinar. So without further ado, Stephanie, over to you, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Mary Eleanor, and thanks to everybody at DAL, and for everyone that's been able to join us today. I'm going to cover a fair amount of content around financial literacy and the gaps between what we think will work and what actually works with people. But I want to kick things off with a poll question. I really like to create an interactive experience. I know it's hard. I know we're all zoomed out, but polls do help quite a bit. So the first question I've got, and I'll get you to launch that, Mary Eleanor, as soon as you have a chance, is how confident are you in your ability to manage your debt? So I'll give you a second to answer the question. It's not a trick question. It's just a wondering, and it has a lot to do with some of the content we're going to talk about today, how you feel about your own financial abilities. So you could be extremely confident, very confident, somewhat confident, not so confident, or not confident at all. And none of those are bad answers. They're not wrong answers. They just are. So I'll give you another couple seconds. If you haven't voted in the poll, I can see we've got a few people who haven't voted yet. I'll give you another couple of seconds to get your votes in. We're getting pretty close to our max. And I think we can go ahead and end the poll now. I just leave it up if you could. Perfect. There we go. So we have 8% saying they're extremely confident, 62% saying very confident, 8% saying somewhat confident, and 23% saying not confident, no one feeling not confident at all. So that is really helpful information to understand. In how we process information about how to manage our finances, and how financial institutions and financial education projects and programs attempt to support people as they work to improve their financial stress or financial situation. We know in Canada, most people feel that they are under financial stress, but at the same time, a little different than our survey, Canadians in general must be even more confident. But 81% of Canadians feel that they can successfully manage their debts. Yet the statistics around Canadian debt would indicate that it's more than 19% of us are at some sort of a risk with our debt. So confidence is a very important measure for financial wellness, but unfortunately, in many cases, it's become the only measure, and it's not a great indicator of underlying financial health. Your confidence is how you feel about something, and your actual financial scenario is much more objective than how you feel about something. So why do we find that happens a lot? You know, if you were in a room full of drivers and you asked everybody who thinks they're better than an average driver to raise their hand, always more than half of the room will raise their hand. How can that be? How can lots of people, most of people, all of the people be better than average drivers? That's not possible. But humans suffer from something called illusory superiority. So it's a cognitive bias. There's a reason for it. We do this to survive. It helps us be confident enough not to be terrified of the world around us. It lets us be brave enough to drive. It lets us be brave enough to start businesses or go out for job interviews or apply to a university that we really want to go to. It makes us brave in many ways, but it doesn't always indicate underlying capability. This example is my favorite. So 90% of the faculty at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln rated themselves above average for teaching ability. And of course, just like every driver can't be better than average, 90% of the professors cannot be average, period. That's impossible. They can't be better than average. So caution has to be really taken when you're using confidence-based information or confidence-based financial health scores to determine if a population of people, or even if yourself, if your financial health is at its best. So there's nothing wrong with whatever scenario somebody finds themselves in at this exact moment of time. It is what it is. But confidence base alone is not a great way to measure financial health. So where do people look for information when they do find themselves not so confident or looking for support as they make financial decisions? Well, 32% of people rely on friends or family for general financial management advice or guidance. So that's not really surprising. It's not that most people would tell you, you know, a third of their friends are brilliant with money. It's that one of the ways humans determine how somebody else is doing with money is what we can see. So when we look at other people's standards of living, when we see their activities on social media, when we see the house they live in or the car they drive or the clothes they wear, we construe that into a picture of what we think that means about their financial capability or their financial health in general. And we can't observe this from financial institutions. So a lot of times financial institutions think that, you know, everybody tells them everything about their finances, but unless you have to, like in order to get a mortgage, a lot of people will leave additional information out, or they don't necessarily feel that their financial institution will definitely provide them spending management or general financial management or cash flow advice. They know their products are there, but they don't believe that's what's going to happen. And they can't look into an institution and see examples of individual human behavior when it comes to finances, because that's not what you see when you look at a bank or a credit union or a firm. So 25% of people, less than the number of people who would go to friends or family for advice, 25% will rely on their bank or credit union for general financial management guidance or advice. And we know that advice from financial institutions is far too product focused. So you'll see marketing about retirement planning, but then when you dig deep, there might be a blog post or two, and then it's really all buy this mutual fund. And so that leaves people with a gap in financial information. And a lot of financial institutions do try, they invest in financial literacy programs, they try to put content out that helps to educate people. But at the end of the day, products and services are what keep their lights on and allow them to return funds to shareholders. So most of their marketing still loops back to products. It's focused on service and rates. And that's not exactly what people need. So an individual goes in looking for a mortgage product, they're not told necessarily what they can actually afford based on their cash flow. They're told what the maximum is they can get approved for based on their credit and income. And those two things could be vastly different. You know, if I have childcare costs and you and I have the same income, then I might actually have way less ability to afford the same size mortgage as we both get approved for if our credit scores and incomes are the same, because I have a different level of financial commitment, and that can cause some real challenges. So we know that even without the pandemic, majority of people are feeling some financial stress. So even though we know most people in the initial survey I shared with you, in that initial data, most people obviously feel confident about their ability to manage debt. At the same point in time, 75% of millennials, and this is not unusual for other age groups, it's in the ballpark, agree that money worries are causing them emotional stress. And we know that financial stress and mental stress are very close together, and financial health affects mental health. And so we really need to think about this. So millennials are stressing over financial obligations. So that's 18 to 34 are the most financially stressed among various generations, with 51% reporting extreme financial stress over their current obligations. So this is another problem with absorbing financial information. If you're already under big stress and a bunch of financial facts are somewhere and you could search them out and find all the information, you're not likely to do that. So a lot of people have gaps in how to go from I'm worried about this to I can tell exactly what to do. I feel confident about the changes. And not only am I confident, but I can see the results. We know that right now, 46% of Canadians are borrowing for basic things. So they're using credit to buy food or pay expenses because of monthly cash flow or cash shortfalls. And we've seen that over and over and over again. I think we're going on a decade now where debt repayment is the highest top financial priority across multiple surveys, and most people are struggling in some way, with 81% of people reporting some degree of financial stress. And so a lot of people think, well, most of the people that are financially stressed, maybe they just have a low income. It turns out that's not true either. In fact, 50% of households with a minimum income of $100,000 still score as coping or vulnerable according to the Financial Health Index. So having a larger income doesn't necessarily protect you from financial risk or financial stress. Having a big income doesn't mean you save a lot of it. You know, in many cases, you have a much bigger shovel with which to dig the hole. You know, you're more capable of borrowing more capable of buying more. And that creates risk too. Having a higher income doesn't necessarily protect you from that. So we know that even households with $150,000 of income, household income, didn't have access to $1,000 in savings. And that's 23% of those households. So it's not just a resources thing. Making more money can be helpful, but not if we don't change our capability in order to manage that. So I've got the next poll question for you, and Mary Eleanor, I'll get you to post that poll. I'm wondering, what type of debt do you think is most common among Canadian retirees? So just click on what type of debt you think is most common. You should be able to see that poll now. And if you can't see the poll, you may want to come out of full screen mode. Some devices, full screen mode will obscure the poll. So I'll give you a second to answer that. So your options are, do they have mortgages? Do they have credit cards? Do they have lines of credit, car loans, personal loans, vacation debt, renovation debt, health-related debt, that sort of thing. So I'll give you a few more minutes, a few more seconds, not minutes, to get your vote in. We've got majority of people have voted. I'll give you another couple of seconds to get that vote in, and we'll talk about that in just one second. All right, I think we're good to close the poll. Thank you, Mary Eleanor. All right, so you guys I'm impressed. I'm really impressed. If I ask a group of financial professionals, and some of you may already be financial professionals, if you are, I'd love to hear that in the chat. If you're a financial advisor, financial services, any kind of role within financial services, please let us know in the chat. That would be interesting to know. But often when we're educating financial professionals, they have a tendency to think that people who are retired don't have credit card debt, but you guys are pretty close to what we actually see. So our poll shows 7% thought mortgage debt, 7% thought line of credit, 60% said credit card debt, 7% said car loan, and 7% said personal loan, and nobody went for vacation related, renovation related, or and we had 13% said health care or health related debt. So we'll stop sharing there, and we'll go back. Just make sure that poll has stopped sharing there. All right, so we'll look at the actual data. So right now, 66%, so you guys were so close, 66% of Canadian retirees carry credit card debt. And when we say carry, we mean they have a balance from month to month. So this is concerning because credit card debt is the most expensive debt you could have. And if you look at the other types of common debts among retirees, it's credit card debt, and then car debt, and then health expenses, holidays, renovations. And this particular stat that we pulled from Sun Life doesn't have mortgages in there. But most often when I see stats that have mortgages in there, they'll show somewhere between 14 and 15% of retirees in Canada carry a mortgage. But why all this credit card debt? You know, arguably the people that are retired today have better pension options than the people who will retire in 20 or 30 years from now. They were more likely to have been part of a pension plan. They were more likely to have had a lower mortgage amount when they bought their first home. Their first home cost was much closer to their income a year than anybody buying their first home today would be able to see. So this is indicative of a few things. One, we do have a lot of people who feel they were taught to pay down your mortgage. Don't, pay down your mortgage, retire mortgage free. But retire mortgage free is misleading if you actually have a bunch of other debt. You're not really debt free. Sure, you're mortgage free, but it actually might have been more financially efficient to refinance. But credit cards have a lot to do with that tendency to not want to refinance, to focus on the mortgage and kind of forget about that debt. That debt is very expensive and it can create a mess, and it can erode assets that you worked really hard to save for your retirement, or reduce the impact of any pension you have because you've got to make those credit card payments. Car payments are secondary, but they shouldn't be ignored. One of the things when people are thinking about retirement is they fail to realize that, if you retire when you're 55 or 65, as long as you're still driving at that point, there's a good chance you're going to have to drive a few more cars before you're really not driving. But a lot of times in retirement, people think, well, I won't be buying a new car because I'm not going to be working anymore. But if you are still relying on a vehicle to get you from point A to point B for several years for many people, that is a significant expense, and it can come right back up. So it does cause quite a few challenges. So we see all these stats about the challenges that people face. We talked a little bit about confidence at the beginning. And there's been countless efforts to improve financial literacy. Canada had a financial literacy task force. They uncovered all kinds of challenges. They focused mainly on fees, embedded commissions in financial instruments, and commissions that financial professionals were paid, or fees that institutions charge that the public might not be aware of. But they also identified that there was a lot of issues around debt management and cash flow management. They just didn't come forward with a whole lot of solutions. And ultimately, we see very few solutions in that kind of cash flow management, debt management space. Looking at a meta-analysis of over 200 studies, there was a 0.1% change in financial behavior that could be attributed to interventions that attempted to improve literacy. So what we're learning is financial knowing and financial doing are not the same thing. And most financial literacy interventions are trying to give you facts, information. They think that, oh, if you just knew this fact, you would behave differently. But that's not necessarily true. Can you apply the fact to your own finances? Do you know how to change that information? And how long does that information last after you learned it? So we know that it's very challenging to get basic financial education to lead to improvements in financial behavior because it's difficult to apply. The other thing is timing. A lot of times you've probably all heard this, and you can let me know in the chat if you have, but certainly I hear this from a lot of people. They should teach money in school. I don't disagree. There is a big problem, although I do see lots of people working on it. There is a lot of effort afoot to change this, but teaching financial information too soon before you can use the information is useless. So 24 hours of financial education. So just think about how many hours it takes to complete a university credit, or how many hours a child spends in a class in a semester in secondary school, or any level post-secondary. Just think about that. Imagine 24 hours of education. You would think that would stick, but it tends to decay after about a delay of 18 months from using it. So if you learn about mortgages when you are in grade 12, chances are it won't help you very much by the time you actually take out a mortgage. So the timing of financial education really needs to be considered. Basics should be working. I'm getting a note here that screen sharing isn't working properly. So I'm going to just stop sharing my screen and start sharing my screen. I will keep going though. So just let me know if you see my screen when I share it again. You should see my slide. So 24 hours of education on finance is a lot. And for that, if you compare it to like a standard subject, for that to be gone if you don't use it in 18 months, it has a really low or short shelf life when compared to others. So I can see there's somebody raising their hand. Just let me know in the chat if the screen sharing is working properly, because it should be on my end, but it may be sticking. All right, so why does it erode so fast? Well, one of the problems is we don't learn it like we learn other things. So when we learn about math or science, then we have skills. So we have methods we learn formulas, we practice, we do it over and over and over again, and we carry the skills we learn in math from one year to the next for all of our years of school, right? I bet all of you still do addition and subtraction from time to time. You carried that skill set, that pattern, that formula, that process from many years. Well, financial information isn't being delivered like that. There's no process entered into it. There's no formula. It's just facts. So an hour of financial education, for example, which might be a more common amount of financial education, can last as little as a few months. So just educating, just information really isn't enough. People need to be able to apply what it is that they are trying to learn. So 90% of the studies measuring the impact of financial literacy don't test any form of intervention. They're just testing things like memorization. If I taught you 10 facts in a webinar, can you take a quiz and remember them all? That doesn't translate to the next time a mortgage document is in front of you, you know exactly what to do, exactly what to sign, exactly what to take advantage of. You don't know what to argue about. You don't know what to question. Those things don't translate. And part of the problem is that the industry puts a lot more money into marketing financial products than they do towards financial education. So it suffers from, a lot of assuming and then not enough resources to help improve people. So I just see we have some other folks putting up their hands. So the team there on the panel should be able to help you out. If you're looking for anything particular, make sure you enter it in the chat. So to give you some sense, financial services companies spend about $17 billion annually marketing their products, and only $610 million are spent on financial education. So it's not a surprise that most people feel like the industry isn't doing enough, providing enough tools or systems or educations to balance out the conflicts that are brought about by commissions and other parts of the industry. And only 9% of people indicated they thought that the financial services industry was doing enough to support people's financial education. So ideally, this is what we think financial literacy should look like, but I'm going to argue that what we're really talking about is financial capability. Literacy is the ability to understand. The rest of it, what we're actually trying to achieve with most financial literacy efforts, is that people can improve their finances, and that goes beyond literacy. So I have this to share with you, just the stages of capability, going from understanding to actually being capable consistently, time over time, as your life changes. So the first stage is understanding. Financial literacy is, helping somebody understand enough information that they could change their situation, but that's not enough. So the basics are important, but that isn't going to cause behavior change. So most of what we see in the world today is just in that first layer, understanding. That's where everybody's effort has gone. Once somebody has an understanding of a concept, a product, how something works, then they've got to be able to, it looks like the slide presentation is reduced in size. Unfortunately, that doesn't seem to be the case on my end. I can try stopping and sharing my screen again, but I didn't change anything, so it shouldn't have done that. Hopefully that fixed it. Yeah, so understanding is one thing, but then the next thing you need to be able to do is take the thing you understood and then be able to compare the thing, the concept or the item, against your own particular financial situation. So just at the stage of weighing options and understanding, what things do I even need to do in order to be able to assess my situation. So if I learned about mortgages, then that context part is, do I even need to put my mortgage through this thought process? Do I have the best deal? How do I know I have the best deal? So that context piece. Then there's the layer of application. So I understand something, I am able to put it in context. Now I need to be able to take that and apply it to my own situation. So I understand how mortgages work in general. I've dug in enough to know what my mortgage is. Now I can apply some of my understanding to see, is my mortgage the best it could be? Should I consider refinancing? It's not just about rate. I mean, mortgages is a great example. We're marketed with rate. You drive down the road and you see, 2.99 or 1.75 or 3.2, but that's not the only thing that goes into the cost of a mortgage debt. Things that go into a cost of a mortgage debt are things like interest rates and amortization and your total debt borrowed, your total amount financed. So that can be something that you need to really think about, all of the layers. But if you only have information, you may not go farther than that. So applying the information to your own situation, and then finally being able to do that in a way that every time you make a new financial decision, you have the knowledge in your hands, or you know exactly where to go to find it. And we know you're financially capable, and you know you're financially capable because you see your savings are increasing, your debt is reducing, you have adequate retirement savings, you know how to figure that out, and you have healthy credit habits. So things like your credit score are a number. Those you can determine whether you have good or bad credit. It's not subjective at all. So you want to make sure that you're thinking about, if you've learned something, or if you're part of educating people about finances, How do they get past understanding? Because even if you do a really good job explaining, that doesn't lead. People need to learn and then do. And if you've participated in financial education, or you're thinking of putting that into your repertoire as a professional, if the person can only learn but can't do anything with it, you can't tell what they could do next, then you really end up with a gap where they only understand. So I would argue that this is what we really see for financial literacy right now, is that there's a lot of focus on understanding. There's a little bit of context. Application almost isn't there, and capability is really inconsistent and difficult to measure. All right, so that's what I would tell you it looks like right now. So what do we do about it? So timing of education really matters. Several studies have shown that education retention decreases much faster than math or numeracy skills. So we already talked about that. And there's a lot of educators who would tell you numeracy skills are challenging. So financial education is even more difficult to retain than that. Just-in-time education. So delivering financial education just before a decision is made would be ideal. So if in your role, you're trying to help people make changes in their finances, or your general career is helping people, or you're considering adding financial advice to your career, knowing when to provide information is really key. So lining that up with a milestone or a key event. So for example, some things we can use people's age to determine the probability that they need certain information. So for example, if you're 18 and in high school, that's the perfect time to start learning about credit cards, because you're almost old enough, or you are old enough, depending on the credit card provider, to get one. So you could use what you learned. If you don't get a credit card, you won't build your credit. So you not having a credit card at all doesn't protect you from credit cards. They're like financial power tools. You need to learn how to operate them, not avoid them at all cost. And so, but learning about credit cards when you're in grade 9 would be very useless, right? It would be unlikely to be retained by the time you actually need to do it yourself. So looking at key milestones like newly graduated, somebody nearing retirement, getting married, anything like that, those are great indicators for upcoming likelihood of financial decisions. So that type of thinking about timing can really help improve people's financial capability, not just dump kind of more information on them. Because I think at this point, you could Google everything you'd ever need to know about money. So everybody should be perfect, but that's just not how it works, right? Because we're humans. So the other thing is that adults learn by doing. So we have something called transactive memory, and that's when by doing something, we improve our literacy. So as silly as it sounds, doing something like reading your credit card statement, and you don't have to do this all the time, but having somebody read their credit card statement once a month improves their financial literacy. Having somebody manually pay bills, although I'd argue a lot of them should be automated, but checking the bills that they're correct, that improves people's financial literacy. It also improves their awareness of what's going on. Financial responsibility is another key thing. So when one person is the only one that is responsible for all the household spending decisions, that can really harm the other person's financial capability and financial literacy over time. So partners should really consider some degree of splitting the family finances. Maybe one person is the one that pays the bills, but maybe once a month they sit down together and go over everything to make sure they're both on the same page. Because the at-home CFO versus the non-CFO does cause some problems. That non-CFO type partner in the relationship needs something else, either some kind of education or some kind of regular rhythm to checking on the financial state of the family in order to maintain or grow their literacy. So we don't want to leave one partner behind in the dust. People also struggle with change. It's unlikely that if somebody isn't in the ideal state of financial health, that they can magically improve it without making actual changes, unless piles of money fall on them and they don't change their spending habits at all, and somebody else sets everything up for them. Chances are most of us have to make changes. So when you're trying to make a financial behavior change or support somebody in making a change, environment matters. It's easy to slip back into old habits if somebody's financial behavior remains the same. So, or the environment remains the same. So changing your account structure when it comes to managing your cash flow, for example, is crucial. And I'm going to give you a specific example of that in a minute. If you just go on a budget and you tell yourself you're going to spend less on lattes, and all of that sort of thing, if that's what you're doing, then that's going to be super challenging for you to stay on track. If your financial strategy is willpower, it's unlikely to work. If you shift your environment, and I mean the way your accounts are set up, to make it easy for you to do the right thing and hard for you to do the wrong thing, you're more likely to be successful. So using friction to your advantage. So if you're considering giving people financial advice, or if this is something you already do, anything that makes the friction go in between the person and the bad habit is ideal, and remove the friction away from the good habit. A lot of times when we're trying to help somebody with their spending, or if we're thinking that we're trying to change it ourselves, we think, oh, let's look at what we were spending. Let's look at our tracking. Let's look at where we spent money in the past. And the problem with that is it doesn't necessarily work. So if you wanted to go look at how much you spent on utilities, one, it would be pretty easy to figure out even for a whole year, because there are probably only 6 to 12 transactions, say, on your power bill or your hydro, depending on where you are. So there aren't 1,000 transactions to track down. So you can figure that one out, and it doesn't require a huge amount of behavior changes, or you have limited ability to actually change those costs without moving or changing your heating system or something extreme. So tracking those doesn't improve, like it gives you a sense of the cost, but beyond that, it doesn't really change your ability to do that. Tracking things like how much you spent on coffee, we know most people will get frustrated or feel guilty. And if we start behaving that way, if we start saying, well, we're going to track everything, one, we wrote down history, the thing already happened. And two, our challenge is that not only did it already happen, so we can't undo it, but it doesn't necessarily indicate what we could change. It just says what we did. So tracking can be really intuitive to follow that, but I encourage you to think a little bit more counterintuitively around tracking, because it really is, it's a high friction activity. Remember I said, we want low friction between the person and the good behavior. Tracking is not a low friction activity. It's a super high friction activity. So when we're thinking about financial literacy and actual improvements over finance, which I would say is still in that financial capability category, data and care are needed. So if an organization is publishing results on financial health, it's really got to be more than confidence measures. So when you're reading the news, or when you're looking at indicators of financial health, a press release on the percentage of Canadians retiring in debt, or a health release on the number of people who feel good about their financial outlook, read the fine print, go read the study. Half the time you can find it. A lot of these things are survey based, so they're limited in how numerical they are. They're not taking somebody's finances or 2,000 people's finances and actually figuring out their financial health. And that would be hard. But the other thing that's happening is people have that illusory superiority, right? And so the chances that self-assessment information is accurate is lower. In fact, it's more likely leaning to overly rosy rather than overly negative. So when you see a headline that says X number of Canadians or Americans feel great about their finances, like deduct some points, because it's probably not really reflective of their actual financial state. Thinking about cause and effect, sometimes financial literacy is measured just on that retention, just memorization, and that's not an indicator that the information has been taken in and is being used to affect change. So watch for data that leans on, again, those confidence measures or memorization. And people are in general overconfident. So anytime it's self-assessments or confidence, they tend to be skewed rosy rather than the other way. So think about that as you see studies, as you see information, because I think sometimes, especially things where, most people feel good, then sometimes a client may feel like, well, I'm supposed to feel like them, so I'll go along and pretend I feel that way too. So I said I was going to share something practical. It does sound like we're having a little bit of a technology issue, but hopefully we've got the screens cooperating, and this is recorded, and I don't think that'll affect it.
Stephanie, I may try to speak here without creating any tech difficulty. So I hope that everyone can hear me. If you do have a challenge, feel free to include it in the chat. But as Stephanie mentioned, we will be recording it, sending it later today. So bear with us. Some really good content here. So Stephanie, back over to you. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, so it is getting recorded on the screen, so hopefully we won't have a challenge with that. So I promised you a practical strategy, so I'm going to share something quite practical with you. When I was an advisor, I spent 10 years helping individuals, and I've spent the last 10 years educating financial professionals and working with my team, where we've created tools to help people change their spending, and taken some of the education I worked on in the early days and turned it into e-learning that anyone could use. And so one of the core things we learned about managing cash flow is you really need a way to simplify high frequency things that are high risk in order to be able to provide somebody advice around spending changes. So if you have to have multiple categories, if there's a spreadsheet involved, if success means envelopes and jars, then most people are not going to be able to long-term change their behavior. And if we're talking about literacy converting into capability, it's key that whatever strategy a person is following is reasonable and realistic for them to follow for a long time, hopefully the rest of their days. So this is our way of sorting expenses, which simplifies the view, and it allows you to see different aspects of financial advice and financial strategy in a much faster way without putting the person in a position where they feel like you're actually not taking into account their real situation. So we found a way to simplify it without shortcutting it. And so what we do is we look at expenses in two buckets. So we look at committed expenses and spendable. Now you might be familiar with something like variable and fixed. Variable expenses are things that change from month to month. Of course, fixed expenses stay the same. One of the challenges we found with that is gasoline is a variable expense, but if you use all of your energy trying to change your gasoline spend, you're probably not going to be very successful at reducing the amount you spend on gasoline, but you're going to use up an awful lot of your willpower focused on that, and you won't be equipped to manage your spending more carefully in other places where you do have a lot of control. So a variable and fixed didn't work very well. We tried wants and needs, but groceries are both a need and a want. You know, you can't eat the patio set at the superstore. Well, I guess you could try, but I think it would not go well. So a lot of the stuff inside of the grocery store is not a need, but we think of groceries as a need because we have to feed ourselves and our families, but it makes the line blurry. So what we came up with was committed and spendable. Committed expenses are actually easier to figure out. They're more likely to be accurate, and they're low emotional risk. So they're more predictable. You don't accidentally overspend on them. So if your rent is, $1,600 a month, it isn't $1,600 a month, 1 month, and then you got really tired and didn't pay attention. Then the next month it was $2,000. That's not how it works, right? So rent, utilities, mortgage payments, investments, insurance, bills. Those are all low risk committed expenses, and a person can figure these numbers out easily and quickly and verify them easily because they aren't 32 transactions in a month. But this stuff over here, the spendable expenses, these high risk expenses, groceries, morning coffee, entertainment, eating out, these things are very difficult for anyone to give you accurate information about. Now, some people do live in a spreadsheet and they love it. That's awesome, but there aren't very many of them. And their spreadsheet does not mean that they've got every penny figured out. And the other thing we see some people saying, well, I have an app and it figures all of that out. Again, that just recorded history. It shows you what you did, not gave you a way to control or change what you're going to do. So the spendable number, what we decided to do with that is instead of adding up this information, because it's almost never accurate, so it's really unreliable, and using that data is messy. Think of it yourself. If you actually wrote down all your committed expenses and added them up and wrote down what you thought you spent on these spendable expenses, I bet you think you have money left over at the end of the month, but you don't have it anywhere. That's exactly what I'm getting at. This data is messy, unreliable. So what we started doing is making a recommendation of a spendable number specific to an individual or household. Today, our software does that, but originally it was something I had to eyeball, ballpark, and try and figure out. So separating these two expenses is really key. So knowing and doing. Knowing is knowing what your committed expenses are and knowing what your spendable is. That is not enough to go from context into application. So knowing the two categories is one thing, that'd be understand. Being able to put your expenses into those two categories would be context. And applying that spendable change to your situation to actually do something with it, that would be application. And then doing it over and over and over again would get you to capability. So what we did is started recommending that spendable. So I've got an example right here. This is our app Winton. So part of the Certified CacheFlo Specialist program, just like clients, we don't want to give you just information, right? Just information is not enough. You need information so you understand. You need to be able to apply, be able to use context. Then you need to be able to apply the information. Then you need to be able to do it over and over and over again. So we built tools with our education. We have tried it 6 ways from Sunday, and it does not work without the two components, learning and doing. So Winton is the client app that's attached to the Certified CacheFlo Specialist suite. And it is an example here. It is showing the client's income. It can figure out the client's spendable. It can figure out the spendable there, that $273 a week. And if we make the additional change of putting the spendable number into a physically separate account, then we'll actually be successful at helping the client make a change, or you'll actually be successful at applying the change to yourself. So that physical separation of those two things. So if we go back to that, understand, context, apply, application, and then capability, this is all the way to application. And once you have a spendable account and the client is following it over and over, then the money we predict is found, the leftover money will actually be there left in the committed account because you're spending out of a spendable account. And that will enable actual change consistently over time. And that can bring people to capability. We know a lot of people have trouble finding no and low fee bank accounts. It's super important that if somebody has a physically separate account, that's not costing them extra money. So we actually have a partnership with Coho. So people that are in our program or using Winton are able to use Coho as their spendable account, which still allows them to get cash back for that spendable spending and allows them to do all sorts of fun things without increasing their expenses. So you can see the URL here. I'll grab it and put it in our chat in a second here, but you can see that there. So that separate account is key. The suite also comes with tools for financial professionals or for professionals who want to put cash flow management into their business and help their clients do better with the resources that they have. So whoever's using this suite has access to share the app to various people that they're working with, clients and customers. They're able to develop strategies and create written cash flow strategies, and then help people manage their cash flow effectively. So that's also part of the suite. And then on the advisor or financial professional or certified cash flow specialist side of things, we have a full designation program. So it's 31 credits of education put into 15 classes plus a final exam. And this gives you practical, actionable information that you can use to grow a business, grow a service, add to your existing practice or services that you might be providing today in your work. And we've partnered with DAL on this collaboration where we've been able to make the program available to folks from DAL, those that are connected with DAL, alumni, etc. So if you want to look into it a little bit more, we certainly encourage you to do that. So I've got the link there. It's cacheflo.co/DAL. So you should be able to see that. We also do make a free trial available. So if you're on the page, have a look at the free trial there. You'll just click get ready. I can actually show you. You can. Just 1 second here. All right. But yes, there will also be links in the email provided later today. So don't panic. You don't have to write down any links. But this is the live page here. So the information on the program and the information on the tools is there. And if you hit get started, it will scroll you down, or if you scroll down, it will take you there, and you'll notice you actually get a perpetual 10% discount for coming through DAL. So just make note of that. Again, it will be in the follow-up information that we'll be sharing with you after the call today, after the webinar today. It will be in your follow-up email along with the recording. We know that this session is really about education, and I want to make some time for questions. We also have a prize to give away. So I do invite you to sign up for a demo. We've got a demo coming up next week that's just especially for people that have joined this session or coming to us via DAL. So I've put the link again. That'll be in your follow-up email as well. But you can certainly register for that demo. We'll get more into the program and what it includes. But this is really focused on the content of getting us from financial literacy to capability. So if you have any questions, now is the time to get those in the chat. I saw we had some technical questions, but any questions about financial literacy, the content, please feel free to enter that. Just a high-level overview here. Timing is really important. Activities, doing things with your money makes you more financially literate. Setting up an environment that supports changes you're trying to make makes it way easier to do better. And when you are measuring any impact you might be having, or when you're reading press releases or studies or anything, watch for the difference between, verifying some information was memorized and actually making change over time, because that's the key, right? Financial literacy doesn't do anything if it doesn't really help us. So if you have a question, now is the time to get it in the chat. But in the meantime, I have a question for you. So get ready. In your chat, we've got a free copy of Spent. Will be going out to you via the mail. So in the chat, the first person to answer correctly, what percentage of retired Canadians have credit card debt, will win the book. So in the chat, oh, we got a winner. All right, so nope, the first person there, we've got a winner. So our first person to answer, please either email to DAL. We need your email, your address and your full name. So you can send that to the panelists in the chat, or you can email Dal that information and they'll get it to me, and I will mail you a copy of Spent. It's all about your money mindsets, and will help you use some of what you learned today as well. And any other questions, they can come into the chat. I've got a few. Yes, you did. Yes, you did win. So we have a winner. You did win. Just make sure you send the information. Yeah, I think the answers just came into the panelists, guys. I don't think they all went to the attendees, maybe one. But yes, so we've got some answers there on the test there, the prize. So any other questions that you might have, please enter them in the chat. And that's it for the bulk of my presentation. I don't see any questions coming in, and I know we're almost at time. Mary Eleanor, anything from you?
No, this has been fantastic, Stephanie. Thank you. I noticed that a few people have had to jump off, which is fine. And apologies, Sarah. That is often just an overlooked piece of Zoom, where it doesn't default to send messages to everyone, but just to panelists. So that's why I generally ask people to make that change. And Roy's just made a comment here, very informative. That's great. Thanks so much, Roy. Stephanie, I know that you were going to just in the last few minutes walk through some of the key questions that you get.
Yeah.
So perhaps we can just spend the last few minutes focusing on some of those key questions for those who are still able to stay with us.
Yeah, so I think like one of the most common questions we get is, you know, how does this work? So some of the certified cash flow specialists we work with, they are already financial advisors, maybe they're investment advisors, they might already be licensed and selling financial products. So they already have a way to generate revenue, giving financial advice, and adding cash flow management in addition to it just expands their capability. It allows them to add more value to their clients. But what some people aren't aware of is that if you're a certified cash flow specialist, we have several who may not sell any financial products, or maybe they only do financial planning for a fee. They don't actually have a license to sell specific products. So certified cash flow specialists, many of them do charge a fee for advice. So if you're already in the business of helping people and you can see weaving cash flow help or cash flow advice into the work that you do, then there is definitely the possibility of creating a revenue stream by providing cash flow strategies. And in part of the education, we provide like letters of engagement to show you how to structure fees and how to talk about it and how to make it clear and clear to the client. But we also do regular cash flow workshops where we're able to engage with the certified cash flow specialist community and answer additional questions that might come up, or have existing certified cash flow specialists share their experience. So they may share things like how much they charge for fees, what type of product or service they provide in total, either using our suite, and sometimes in addition to our suite, they may provide 2 or 3 other different kinds of service, and they've packaged it all together. So that's a really common question we get. The other, most common question I think we get from many people is, how do I take what I learned and apply it? And I would say the first thing, if you're checking out the free trial, join us for the demo next week. If you're checking out the free trial, the most important thing you can do when you're learning about cash flow management is apply the techniques to yourself. Now, a lot of times, we want to learn how to help other people, and we figure we're not really broken, and you're probably not. But you don't have to be broken to be able to improve. And I think when it comes to giving any kind of advice, if you don't take the advice you're giving, it becomes very difficult to be successful at it because you don't have the experience share to give. So those would be the most common things we hear is, can I charge a fee? How do I make a living if I add this capability to my current profession? And where do I start with giving advice? On yourself.
That's fantastic. And I think it's certainly a helpful skill to have. And I just want to thank you, Stephanie, so much for walking us through such an informative webinar and such an ongoing timely topic. I think it's an evergreen topic, really. So for those who are still joining us, thank you so much. We're going to wrap up the webinar for now, but as I said at the beginning, please keep an eye out in your inboxes for an email that will include a link to the DAL exclusive offering that Stephanie walked us through. And as well, there will be a few other resources included in that email. So stay tuned for it. And if you have any questions, Stephanie's email will also be included. Her email address will also be included in that follow-up. Thank you again, Stephanie. Really appreciate you putting together such a thoughtful presentation, and take care, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.